Well, let's go ahead and get started as we welcome in some of Megan's friends and family, and also members of Glenview Community Church. Welcome to our friends. Welcome to our speakers forum tonight. I'm very excited for tonight's presentation. If you have any questions about our congregation, you can go on to our website at www.gccucc.org and learn about all the things we do to be inclusive and welcoming to all God's people in following the way of Jesus. Tom, would you like to go ahead? Tom is one of the chairs of the Speakers Forum Committee team, and he's going to tell us about what we're going to hear tonight. Thank you, Tom.
Thanks, Elizabeth, and welcome everybody to GCC Speakers Forum. Before we introduce tonight's guest speaker, I want to mention that our next program, which is scheduled for 2 weeks from tonight, Wednesday, January 26th at 7 p.m., features the Reverend Lindsay Hammond, who is the policy director of an organization called Restore Justice. And in connection with our Fiat Faith in Action team, Reverend Hammond is going to speak about working to abolish life without parole sentences for young people. A very important topic, and one I think that many people will be interested in. So put that on your calendars for Wednesday, January 26th, 7 p.m. Restore Justice and abolishing life to parole sentences for young people. It is my great pleasure to welcome our guest speaker tonight, Megan Martin, former GCC member, and of course, Betsy Martin's daughter. She's going to speak about stories from a work culture revolution in Mexico, where Megan works to support transformative social innovations in agriculture, community development, and education. After she graduated from GBS and Kalamazoo College, she began her professional career in New York City, producing documentary pieces for public radio. But since 2007, Megan has been in Oaxaca, Mexico, where she came as a Fulbright Fellow and began to collaborate with indigenous radio stations. She co-founded an Impact Hub Oaxaca group supporting social innovation, coordinated learning programs, designed workshops for emerging enterprises and change makers in the region. She works with a lot of NGOs, non-governmental organizations, governments, and social organizations in the US and Latin America, where she assists groups working in agriculture, community development, sustainable coffee, and popular education towards participating in leadership and social and economic transformation. And she says they should do it and do their best while they work joyfully. When Megan is not engaged in her professional activities, her hobbies include mountain biking, long distance swimming, and looking for the best tayuda, which is Oaxaca pizza in the area. Megan, again, thanks for joining us, and we look forward to your talk. If people can either put their questions on the Zoom list, or where it says chat, or hold them till the end, that would be great.
Okay, I'm on.
You're on.
It's my turn. Hey,
Your
everybody. Oh, there's Karen by your side. Excellent. I feel like a good third to the half of the people on this call are like my family. I guess I should have just hosted this same presentation when I was home in October. I guess I haven't been sharing a lot about my work, so it's great to see you guys. Hi, everyone. I want to start by saying thank you first to Tom, Peter, Pastor Elizabeth, and all the people who helped run the Speakers Forum especially Tom for inviting me way back when, 6 months ago, when we were doing the Lenten challenge, and he said, I think I want to hear you speak. And I said, sure. And then hopped to 6 months later, he's like, could you maybe get me a blurb of what you're going to say shortly? And then I said, yeah, mañana. So here we are. Thanks very much for inviting me. Thanks everyone for coming. Those of you who are present and showed up because you're curious, or something stuck out to you about the blurb or the flyer, or my mom strong-armed you, I'm guessing. Also, there was some arm twisting that happened. I'm glad you're here. I wanted to mention just up top a couple of things before I jump in, which is I live in Oaxaca, as Tom mentioned, and pronounced very well. And so the internet here is a little spotty, as well as the power. And so it could pop in and out. If it's just like you missed a couple of words, great, we can just roll with it. If I'm freezing totally, if someone can just let me know, and I'll switch up my internet and hope for the best. The other is that in the work I do, it's really rare that I would talk for 45 minutes straight. I'm probably doing a pretty bad job at my work if I'm talking that long. So I would be more than happy if you want to interrupt me at any point. I'm more accustomed to that, actually. Interrupt me, ask questions. It can be a conversation. It doesn't have to just be blah, 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 blah. Feel free, you can put it into the chat, as Tom mentioned. If maybe Pastor Elizabeth, you see it over there in the chat and you want to shout it out if I haven't seen it for a while, just feel free.
You got it.
Yeah, thanks. And I guess the last part is that I think the most interesting conversations I've had happen around like the hearth, like a table with a cup of coffee or a glass of wine. So I want to invite you guys, if you're not comfortable with where you are, be comfortable. Grab that cocktail. Take your shoes off. I'm wearing slippers, so you feel free too, because I think better conversations and listening happen like that. So feel free, make yourself comfortable. Great, that's it. That's how I wanted to start. I guess my point of departure is I'm curious about you guys and why you showed up. So I wanted to put a question to you, and you can answer in the chat, and everyone can write this down in the chat. If you don't know how to use the chat or it's challenging for you, hold on to your question, and I'm going to read some of the ones that are in the chat out loud, and you can just say yours out loud. But I'm curious, my questions for you guys are, what were you curious about when you received the invitation to this talk? Is there something that draws you to the subject of Mexico? These are my two questions. So plant your feet. Take a breath. What were you curious about when you received this invitation to this talk? Is there something that draws you to the subject of Mexico? Feel free to put it in the chat. Okay, so I see some coming in. Feel free to keep writing there. I'm just going to read some. So I'm here because I work on a board that empowers Indigenous Mayans in Guatemala, and I know I will learn something relevant. Oh, very cool. I'd love to hear more about that, CJ. I was curious how a trip to the border turned into a career. That is in my journal. Yes, I will talk about that. How you carry on so long in Mexico. Must be something there that generates your special missionary zeal. I'm curious about how your organization is funded. I know you're a very frugal gal, but a person also has to eat. It's true. I eat well. Are there any others that you didn't want to write in the chat, but you want to mention? You're welcome to open your microphone and just shout it out. I'm personally very curious about this community. I was very involved with GCC as a youth, and I think some of what brought us into that community still lives within us as adults. How does your history of GCC inform what you do today? Because I wanted to improve my Spanish before we leave for Chile. Ooh. Well, you've got Tlayuda and Oaxaca down, Tom. I think you're set. Although I don't know if they make Tlayudas there. Okay, well, I just wanted to have an idea a little bit about your curiosities and your questions, and you can keep putting questions in there if you want to, because it's really going to help me as I go through my talk. I can mention or highlight some things. So I guess I'll start by saying, although many of you probably already know, I'm Megan, but as Tom said, probably more importantly, I'm Betsy Martin's daughter, right? Most, if not all of you know her. And, I think I should probably say if there's anything you hear today that you think is like very interesting or cool or fascinating work, or you just admire, I think like we could probably all say that I owe that to my mom, and her raising me. You guys all know her fights for social justice. She's a great friend. I think I can really attribute a lot of the things that brought me here today to my mom, especially the invitation to physically be here. And if there's anything you hate that I say today or seems weird or off, we will just put that on my dad, because he's not here. He's not a member of the church. And so we'll just blame him and we'll give him the responsibility. Something went wrong. As was mentioned, I was a former GCC member, so maybe some of you who are involved in the church might have seen me running around in pageants or wearing my pajamas at PYF on Sunday, which really angered my mom. I feel like the conversation went something like, you cannot wear that to church. And I said, God accepts me as I am. And that's where the conversation stopped, because it's a really good argument. But one of my very first introductions to Mexico, to coming to Mexico and working in Mexico, was actually with PYF. When I was a student in high school and spent spring break going on work camps, and my sophomore year, we went to Mexico. And here is a picture I found of that very trip to Mexico. And you can see here what we're doing is we're very dirty and we are replacing showers with baby wipes. One of the very important skills we learned on that trip. But actually, the organization that was hosting us that year was called Border Links. And at the time, this was in 1997, Border Links, the US was talking about, what do you know, building a wall. And they were going to do it with old scrap metal from old airplanes. And so some organizations on both sides of the border thought we need to do something to help build relationships. And this organization called Border Links hosted us, took us across the border. And unlike most work camps we were on, where we had a task, we were like roofing something or building something or shoveling poop at the Heifer Project, this one, we really were just going down there to get to know people. The place we were staying was called Agua Prieta. It's just across the border. You drive down to Tucson, across the border from Arizona. Tiny, tiny town in the desert. Brick makers making bricks. We ostensibly were helping them make bricks, but honestly, they're much faster and better at it than we were. But we spent most of our time in the community, in tents, with the family, with the house behind us as their home that fed us. Playing games with the kids there. And I can say that when I got back from that trip, I was totally changed in terms of my view of the world. It was like opening a small door and seeing there was a whole thing on the other side of it. And I can draw a direct line from that moment, that work camp, to where I am today. Absolutely. And so I want to say thank you to GCC, because I think the PYF program and those work camps are transformative and super important. And as Aubrey wrote in the chat, I think many of us and our friends who are involved in GCC as kids and as youth, like it really changed and marked us in some way. And so, yeah, I wanted to share that. From there, after I left, after I went to college in Kalamazoo, and my next sort of experience in Mexico was when I studied abroad. I went to Kalamazoo College, and everyone in their third year studies abroad. And I came to Oaxaca for the first time then, lived with a family. I can't tell you exactly what drew me to Oaxaca, but I had this sense that I wanted to live with a family, not just rent a room, you know, studying abroad. And the family in Mexico, the nucleus of the family is one of the most important organizational cultural pieces of Mexican culture. And I really got to experience that, lived with an amazing family that is still a family to me today, that calls me up and says, "Oh, daughter, you're so skinny, you need to come over so we can fatten you up." And so that trip itself was sort of my second experience in Mexico. And then finally, I was working in New York City. I was working in public radio, and I'd come down to Oaxaca to visit that family. And there was a lot of social strife and unrest happening in 2006 in Oaxaca. And something felt really alive to me here. Not that I wanted to pick up a picket sign exactly, but that I was thinking there's so much going on here, and I was ready. I was ready to be learning every day, to not be caught in a rhythm. And so I came down, as Tom had mentioned, with a Fulbright. I wrote a proposal to do a radio project, and I worked with Indigenous radio stations in different areas of rural Oaxaca. And these radio stations, what they have that's very unique is a satellite connection to radio stations in the United States. There's a network in the United States called Radio Bilingüe, based in Fresno, California. And they use the radio like a kind of telephone, so that communities that have migrated to the United States can stay in touch with their families, and use the radio to send messages like something as simple as calling into a show and saying, "Hey, the baby's doing great, the money arrives on Tuesday," you know, or dedicating a song to their village on its patron saint's day. So I spent a year doing the Fulbright Fellowship, working with Indigenous radio stations in rural parts of Oaxaca, recording stories, documentary pieces about people living in those communities and what was important to them, what they cared about, what they feared, what they loved, and made a series for the radio station. But what I found in the process of doing that was that the radio station is like the commons, you know, it's like the place you go to exchange and interchange on market day when everyone descended on this town to sell goods. If you lost your wallet, if you lost your kid, you went to the radio station. You didn't go to the municipality. You went to the radio station, and there they would announce it. They'd send out messages. And so because I was there all the time, I got invited out to visit all these communities and projects that were burgeoning in communities. And it made me really aware of how people were organizing or disorganizing themselves. And that's when I came to work at the Hub, which is a co-working space. It's a network of over 100 co-working spaces in all the world, but their space is not just for people to go and work and have a space to work, but there are also spaces for people who are working with social environmental enterprises. And while I was there at the Hub, I ran the learning programs. And I was really interested in how organizations learn and how you can change the way people learn, like the interaction of learning. It doesn't just have to be, maybe it should be action-based, it should be relevant, it should be fun and dynamic, and noticing how making the conditions for how people learn was as important as the content that they were learning. So I see that Elizabeth put in the question, is the Hub a geographic place or virtual place? It's a geographic place. They're actual spaces, co-working spaces that people can rent, offices, desks, they can go take classes, there's events happening at them. Each Hub is unique. So I can't remember still if there was a Hub burgeoning in Chicago years ago, but I don't know if it still exists. But there's hubs all over the globe. You can look up Impact Hub and you'll find if there's one around you if you're curious about a city you're going to. They're really interesting places to plug into communities and what's going on. And so when I left the hub in 2014, I started working as a consultant, and somebody asked, like, how do you make money? How do you stay down there and work from project to project? And at first, what I found was, or the focus after I left the hub was, so many organizations would come to the hub and say, we have a problem and we know what we need to solve it. And that problem is we don't have money. We need money. Or we need this tool, this strategic plan, or this app, or this application. And once we have that, we know we can fly. And what many organizations found after they get the money, after they get the tool, is that actually what is dogging them are human problems, are how we relate, how we work together, how we learn together. So as an organization, we're constantly growing, how we unlearn things that don't serve us and let go of things, how we close things that need to end. You know, lots of those problems dogging organization and groups of people. And that's where I wanted to be working. That's what I wanted to be doing. And generally, I think if you throw out into the universe, like, here is the place, the question, or the challenge where I want to be working, people with that question and challenge, or that similar question or challenge, start flocking to you, or you flock to them, whichever way it works. It's like a magnet. So it starts slow when you're consulting, and then it builds over time. And so when I started 2 years ago, right at the beginning of the pandemic, a wonderful time to begin, a cohort and I, a partner and I, decided to start a consultancy. We've been working one-off doing consulting work for years, and together many times. And we decided we wanted to converge and form a consultancy. And we call it Coquixa Consultores. I'm going to show you guys just like a quick. This is our website. It's beautiful. You can go there and read some Spanish, Tom, and catch up on your Spanish. But you can read or have Google Chrome translate it for you. Some of the work that we do. This is my partner, Erin Dunford. She's a lovely woman, partner, mentor. And Coquixa means, it's a Zapotec word. Zapotec is one of the indigenous languages in Oaxaca. There's over 70 variants and dialects spoken in Oaxaca. Zapotec is one of them. And this is a word that's an ancient word. It's like a 14th century Zapotec word, and it means those who unfold. And the reason that we chose it for our business name is because we really believe at the center of our work that when groups and organizations call us to work with them, that they have what is necessary inside them to solve their challenge, move forward, find a new destination, that it's just a matter of unpacking it, unfolding it, finding what's inside, moving it around and rejiggering it. And that's what we come in to do. We don't come in as experts. We're non-experts. They're the experts. We come in really to find out what's going on and put their knowledge, experience, stories, needs at the center of what they're doing. And what we do is we design spaces or help them host spaces for participatory processes. We're interested in not just working with the manager or the supervisor, but a team. It can be a community, an organization, a nonprofit organization, a commercial business. We're interested in many people at the organization participating in a process that they're interested in. Sometimes it can be a long process. The two projects I'm going to tell you about a little later are projects I've been working on for years, where I accompany an organization for years. Other projects are one-off. They call us to host a retreat, their annual year-end retreat, and they want to involve their community or their office or their group in steering the organization for the future. And we come in and help them and co-design with them a process, right? One of the central approaches that we use at Coquixa is something called the art of hosting. Maybe some of you have heard of it. I feel like at GCC, maybe even you've practiced some practices from the art of hosting, but like, you know, what's in the name, art of hosting is it's an approach to how we can work differently together. And the idea being that instead of coming in as a leader or a facilitator and I've got the answer and I'm going to organize you and tell you what to do now that I've got the idea of things, and instead I'm more like a host. like at a party. And what does a party host do? I set the lighting just right so we can't see anybody's wrinkles or that spill on their shirt. I put the music on. I make sure someone brought beer, someone brought tlayudas, right? I've invited the right people to the party, but once the party starts happening, I step back because I don't need to pull you on the dance floor and move your arms and legs like a puppet. I don't need to sit between two people and tell them what to talk about. I'm setting the conditions so that people can have new ways to relate to each other, have significant conversations that are important to move forward, can discover something. And so the art of hosting it's a set of practices and methodologies for doing that. We also train people on using the art of hosting practices. You guys might know some of the practices are like circle practice, a world cafe, open space. They're used around the globe. So those are at the center of our work. And some of our principles that we work with are using powerful questions to detonate conversations and actions. We like to practice a kind of black belt in listening and paying attention, especially listening to voices that are at the edges. You know, there's always these voices in groups and communities and organizations that are louder and more dominant. And so when we don't hear from the edges, we create blind spots. And so we're often looking for how we can make more visible some of those softer voices, ideas, the edges of our understanding as a group. We're looking for how we can pull that out of a group. And, you know, like I said, I'm most times I'm walking into an organization as a not an expert at what they do. I'm not a farm worker. I'm not a potter. I don't make mezcal or coffee. These are groups I've worked with. They're the experts at that. And ultimately what I'm looking to do is, it's funny, Peter, that you asked me about how I make money or how I work. I'm often looking for how to unemploy myself when I work with a group. If I'm doing it right, I should eventually not work with them anymore. Not because I fried the relationship, because I want all the knowledge and what we learn and the skills to stay inside the group. I want them to build institutional learning wisdom amongst themselves. And it shouldn't be me showing up as an expert telling them what to do. And the moment I leave, it falls apart. So I'm looking to build that learning as an organization, that strength and capacity, so I can step away and they take it from there. You know, and I can unemploy myself constantly over and over again, right? And I guess the other piece about a principle of the work I do and that we do at Coquixa is I really like to have fun. I like to enjoy my work. I like it to be dynamic and not boring. And I want people to show up with all parts of themselves. Like, we're not trying to fix problems just with our brains, but also with our heart, with our body, and all those things need to be involved in what we do. So we do a lot of like play in our work, a lot of games, a lot of skits. We like anything we can draw on, we do and we use. Okay, so that's just like a little background about my work. I should say that my work used to look, let me share my screen with you guys. My work used to look like this, right? It's like groups, generally just working together in different scenarios, in different situations, loving being together, maskless, together, close, touching each other. And now my work looks a lot like this. You know, it's like a lot of this. And I'm looking at a screen of a bunch of people really far away, tiny, small microphone through a telephone. And sometimes it looks like this too. It's sometimes fun online and can be really fun and dynamic. But a lot of my work nowadays also has to look like this. The pandemic has drastically changed what and how we're able to do things. One of the projects I'll share with you guys today is based here in Oaxaca, and we are able to come together at times. But as many places around the globe are facing this, you know, it's like from one day to the next, we're just trying to figure out how to do what we used to do, you know, somewhat easily. Anyway, the first organization that I want to talk to you guys about is called the Equitable Food Initiative. And I want to say right off, this is not my project. This is their project. And they hire me as a consultant to come in. The Equitable Food Initiative is a workforce development organization as well as a food certifier. So they have a food certification. This is the label. You can look for it in your supermarket, and you should look for it. I'd be very curious to hear if anybody finds it. They were founded in 2008 by convening stakeholders who are from all parts of the food chain. And these are some of their stakeholders. So you guys might notice some of the names on there: Costco, right? Bon Appetit, Nature Sweet. Maybe you eat those. I feel like those are the cherry tomatoes I find everywhere in the world, Mexico and the United States. But some of the other names you might not recognize from this list are distributors, are farm worker unions, are consumer advocacy groups who test for food safety on food, are people who work in food sciences. So in 2008, the Equitable Food Initiative convened stakeholders from all parts of the food chain and said, what is important to us all to transform or make better immediately? And there's lots of things they disagree about along the food chain because they're looking, you know, each of them for their own needs and their own value. But there were major things that they agreed upon, and they said, can we come together and form a food certification program that works on those things that we care about together? And the things that they cared about and the things that they decided in sort of the pillars of their food certification program are improving labor conditions, improving food safety, and having a responsible use of pesticides. So those are the three kind of tenets or pillars of their program. And they're really rigorous, their standards. Most food certifications that you might have heard of, like fair trade or organic, or I'm not sure what other ones are in your guys' area, but most of those require, when they go and audit them on farms, they require them to meet about 60% of the standards. The Equitable Food Initiative requires people or farms, when they're audited, to be certified with 100% of their standards. And there's over 300 of them. And they range between labor, things having to do with labor conditions, things having to do with food safety, and things having to do with responsible use of pesticides. Their approach, which I like really drew me in when they approached me about working with them, is systemic. They're looking for systemic change. So at the macro level, they're, as you can see, this group of people, they're trying to gather them, and their board and their executive committee are populated by people from all parts of the food chain so that they keep weighing in about this food certification program and how it's going. And then at the micro level, on farms with farm workers, their workforce development program focuses on how farms can create a team, they call it a leadership team, composed of people from all parts of the farm. So not just managers and supervisors, but people who are picking the produce, people who are fumigating, people who are cleaning the bathrooms, people who are in human resources and accounting, that they come together and form a team that can better look at improvements that are needed on the farm related to the standards. And because they have eyes on all different places on the farm, they can use that, harness that collective intelligence from the group to solve some of the entrenched problems they've had on the farm. So the things they're trying to shift at the Equitable Food Initiative is really poor income for farm workers, lots of safety issues on farms, discrimination, lack of equity in pay and in treatment. Like, these are the people who are on the base of our food chain, who are doing everything needed to produce the food on our table, and they're trying to bring more equity for those people. They're also trying to look at food contamination. I'm sure many of you have heard or read in the news about different problems with food contamination around the country, right? Like, oh, there's E. coli in that spinach in California, and then suddenly nobody buys spinach anywhere. It doesn't matter if it came from the farm that had the contamination. It shuts down, it puts a recall on products. And what happens down the chain when that happens affects all the people on the chain. Retailers, of course, consumers who were ill, but then farm workers at the base and growers who pay them lose their whole industry, right? For an entire season or longer. So that's really important to everybody on the chain, food safety, because it affects them so much when it goes wrong, when things go wrong. And then finally, another piece that the Equitable Food Initiative is looking to transform and affect is, though farm workers are the main motor of cultivating, growing our food and bringing it to our tables, they have really little participation and a very limited role in changing conditions on farms. They have very little power, say, voice. And so that's another piece that they're really trying to work on. So what I do for them is I go to farms. They send me to farms with another consultant like me. We always work in a team, in a pair. They send us to farms. They sent us to farms. For the last few years, I've been doing this. And I go and work with developing to build capacity with their leadership team. And like I mentioned, so the leadership team is a team, a multi-level team. They're from all positions on the farm. They have to have really representative to meet the standard for the certification. They have to have people from all parts and levels of the farm in terms of their position, in terms of gender, in terms of language. If there's different languages, indigenous languages, English, Spanish, Punjabi in farms that are in Canada, they need to have people on the leadership team who speak those languages and represent those people who are on their farm. And the idea of that is that we want the farm workers to be a part of the improvements that can affect them, that can affect food safety and can affect the responsible use of pesticides, right? And that they're the people who are on the ground, are seeing things. So rather than the certification being the responsibility of 7 managers on a farm, and we're talking industrial agriculture farms. So it's, most of the farms I've been on are somewhere between 300 to 1,000 employees. At times there's a small farm, but most of these are very big farms. And so when we're on the farm, we're talking about, 7 managers responsible for a certification program, and there's 500 hands or 500 pairs of hands and pairs of eyes out there. That's impossible challenge for 7 managers to accomplish. And so the idea is to engage the workforce, They form this team. We go and train them. We work with them for, usually we work with them for a week. There's a period in the middle where they go out and practice some of the skills that we're teaching them and come back. We're working with them on things like how to work together. Many of them on the team may have never interacted with other people on the team before, have never been in the office of the organization, or don't spend any time in the field at the farm, right? We have both sides of that. So we convene them over the course of the week. We work on communication skills, listening skills, conflict management, problem solving skills, but using collective intelligence to problem solve. So they pick an actual problem on the farm, they get in teams, they dissect the problem, and then we send them out onto the farm. They conduct surveys, observation, and then they come back and they present, and they're constantly playing with and experimenting with how to present and share what we know in different ways, because their job when we get done with the training is they're now this leadership team that will inform and train the workforce on the EFI program. Dave, do you have a question? I love it.
Yeah, I just figured we'd be a little more engaged here. But I did have a question. One of the things you mentioned was the edges. In my professional life over my career is a lot of times when you're working with folks, the folks who don't say much and kind of do their job very diligently are extremely hard workers. They're very apprehensive about speaking when somebody comes in like you, or hey, am I okay to say this and blah, blah, blah. How do you kind of empower those folks and get those folks engaged? And obviously it's about building trust and stuff. And obviously you do a lot with human behavior. But how do you kind of approach that when you're in such a large environment here, like you're describing at the farms?
Yeah, I mean, one of the tools is creating different circumstances and conditions for those quieter voices to come forward. One of those is we're not always working in a giant group of 15 to 20 people. We'll break them into small groups of pairs, trios. We'll have them do, let's see if I have a picture here, some ridiculous things that throw them outside the normal sort of language of meetings. Like we have them do skits of how they, a problem or something that's happening on the farm. We have them draw something. We have one of the very first activities we do on the farm is everybody draws a picture of their job. And everyone always said, like, I can't draw. And then 30 people are trying to work it out with, like stick figures and all these artists emerge, these people who might be super quiet emerge and have this beautiful skill. And then later in the training, we bring those skills back in. And time is like our best, I don't even want to say weapon, our best tool, because time builds trust and confidence. And we find ways to draw out the quieter voices. And over time, I mean, like one of my favorite stories from being on a farm is seeing, it was a group of 30 and there was a woman on the team who she cleans the lavatories that are out in the fields and very quiet, doesn't read or write. So whenever we'd be in something we're having to read or write, she'd feel a little distant from it. But by the end of the 6 days, like through, she really loved presenting, even though she didn't feel comfortable reading or writing. She liked presenting what other people were doing. She kind of grew into herself. And in the end, the team voted her to be the coordinator of their leadership team. A bit of it's a little magic. It's like the hosting a party, right? Like you're working with different tools and things, and you put people in different constructions of groups, and people tend to flourish. Not always, but it's pretty great to see.
No, that's wonderful. That's wonderful work you're doing. And obviously those people, there's so many people in a company that make it go, everybody from all the way to the bottom, all the way to the top. So when you walk into these companies or these farms or what have you, do you kind of sit leadership down and just say, hey guys, this is what we need to really drive this? And then they kind of set the stage for the employees, and then you just kind of work your magic from there?
Yeah, there's a lot of meetings happening in advance that we land. I would say in lots of the work I do, probably 60 to 70% of my work happens before I'm in the room. The work in the room takes a lot of improvising, but it's all the conditions we set up before. So meetings that I'm not even involved in that are happening before I get on a farm, so that leadership is ready for it. We also do a leadership supervisor training before we get there on the farm. We do it on Zoom usually. We used to do it like the day before when we'd arrive in person, but now we do it on Zoom. We do all these trainings on Zoom too. So it's a lot of the work is happening before we even get there, so that everybody's kind of rowing in the same direction. This is another example. This picture is of, we do something in the middle towards the end where they take us on a tour of the farm, and the people who work in the different places along the farm tell us what goes on there. And that's a real place where people shine because they know what they do. They know it well. And then other people who'd never seen this other part of the farm becomes visible, all these places and spaces that weren't visible to them before. This is an asparagus farm, although what's growing down before you, it's asparagus and strawberries. So these guys are explaining the work they do. Let's see if I have another, like this is these guys doing a skit about discrimination, a real problem of discrimination on their farm. And you can see all the drawings in the background. We fill the room with their work. And at the end, it's like, a memory of everything they've done. And we get out of the way too. We get them in their small groups and get them talking and have them constantly present. And that's the basis of the work, so that when we leave, their leadership team feels strong and they can do the work. The other things we teach them are about the EFI standards, how EFI works. We give them an idea of the bigger picture they're a part of, all the stakeholders in the food chain. And we try to put their expertise and their knowledge at the center, and we try to have fun, because that also breaks things up when it doesn't, I mean, I said this before, but there's a language of meetings, right? And when you stop talking in that language, people who are out on a farm all day long and have to come in and watch a PowerPoint presentation, they're like instantly disengaged. So when you're treating things in a different way, you just see people arrive and be present in a different way. Anyway, so that's the first project. That's the Equitable Food Initiative. Now, let's see if I have a picture. Like now my work with the Equitable Food Initiative looks a lot like this. I've got a training coming up. We have people in multiple rooms. They're in bubbles to protect them from mixing in different workstations. They're all masked. It's hard to hear. It's really challenging. Also fun. I like the challenge of it, but trying to get people to convene and work together, but you're telling them, stop touching each other, get further away, like is mad. But we hope as things settle down, I can't express more how much respect I have for the people that I meet on the farms. I think what's really affected me most is seeing the rhythm at which they work. I'm going to show you. Let me just stop sharing my screen so I can share it with you guys, a video quick. I want you to know this is what the velocity at which your food is produced. Let's see. This is it's a video from my phone, and it's clipped together in 4 just to make it shorter. But this is the actual speed that these tomatoes are being produced and picked. These guys in the morning get a color palette they're given, and they can only pick the tomatoes that are from this exact color palette. That's what the store asks. And they're filling the buckets, they're running because they're paid by bucket. If someone is there registering, you shout out your numbers, you pass up your bucket, 224, and they mark down a bucket, 225, 269, and they run back, fill another one. They can't be too fast that they ruin the product. They're being paid by bucket, and this is what they're doing. 8 hours, a couple 30-minute breaks. And their talent and skill for being able to identify color, texture. Yeah. In the summer, just to share some tidbits from the field, in the summer, they're those who work in the northern part of Mexico on farms, I've been there, and they produce lettuce. I'm having trouble thinking of the word in English. Lettuce, chard, cebollín, what is that? Green onions, strawberries, raspberries, tomatoes, everything you can imagine they're producing. They work at night. It's too hot in the heat of the desert to work. They work under floodlights at night. They shift their entire lives, their childcare, their exercise routine, when they eat, to shift to the food market, and to shift because of the weather and to keep producing. I was on a strawberry farm. Strawberries are so delicate. And as Americans, we want strawberries all year long, all the time. You can find a strawberry in your supermarket today, right? And it's freezing there in Chicago. So the strawberry market, I saw in a day, people, they're so delicate to touch, they don't want to handle them too much. So when they go in the field, instead of something being harvested and sitting in a freezer or something like that, they have the clamshells out in the field, and they put them directly in the clamshell. They're all carrying little buckets that have water with a few drops of chlorine in it. And every 3 plants, they dip their hands in to sanitize themselves and keep working. 3 plants, dip again, keep it, they're hunched over. They've got these like carts that they're using. They put it directly in the clamshell. It goes, the stevedores put it onto the truck. The truck sits maybe for 30 minutes to an hour in a freezer, and then it drives across the border. This is in Baja, California. It drives across the border and it's in a store that day. That is how fast our food is being produced. And it is a well-oiled machine. Not a machine that serves everybody, but a machine, a very well-oiled machine, and at just really big scale. And, you know, some of the stories that we hear on farms are fascinating, but are also, you know, harrowing, that this is where how our food gets produced. And I always tell them at the end of our trainings how grateful I am for everything they do that puts food on my family's plate in the United States, because that's where it's going. It's going to the United States, and how much they're thinking about you all the time. Like, they're thinking about the customer and consumer, and what will this look like? Will this be damaged? Will this, you know, and there's so many protocols. And now with COVID, it's like, you know, add a million more to it. So they are essential workers. Peter, do you have a question?
Well, actually,
Yeah.
Tom, sorry,
sorry.
Peter. Tom had a question first in the chat. So I just want to make sure we go in proper order. So do you see it there? Have you ever used your hosting technique to deal with conflict resolution? Perhaps world peace.
That's a really big task, Tom. World peace. How do I answer? I mean, on the farms, we talk a lot about conflict resolution, and to me, we don't have enough time to get into the complexity on farms about conflict resolution or really entrenched conflict, but the very basics of how we listen to people, how the hurry and the acceleration of the way we work these days, how that affects the way we can relate to one another, and how we can weather when things go wrong, is absolutely something we talk about and work on. They do, a lot of times they do, they draw out a conflict that's happening, and they walk through the different ways that it could be solved. But most of the ways have something to do with listening and pausing. Yeah, I don't know if that answered your question fully. I'm still wondering about world peace. It seems
They're nodding yes. So, okay, Peter, it's your turn.
Yeah, I'm just impressed and amazed and startled too. You're an agent for change. I mean, and from, you know, I'm thinking of Driscoll berries or these giant berry companies and fruit companies. And you're a change agent, and corporations and businesses don't like change. They like to organize it all themselves. And if I hear you right, you're dealing with the top management as well as the people. I mean, the top management's not going to let you in there to talk to these people. So you obviously must be working with the top management. How do you finesse that? And how do you approach it in the agricultural side, side of things? Although it relates to other things too, I think. But
well, the Equitable Food Initiative approaches it and handles it and creates those relationships. There's a whole team behind them creating relationships with farms to get into the certification program. And money drives lots of those growers to get involved. And because Costco is on their executive committee and on their board, Costco says to some of their producers, we need you to have this certification if you want to buy from us. So they look for the certification. That doesn't mean when you get on a farm that they're super receptive, some of the management, to change, but we don't come in honking a horn. I don't come in honking a horn about change. I come in asking what's going on here? Who is in the room? What are you doing? Here's what this certification program is. And I remember when I was trained by the Equitable Food Initiative, that the sort of business development manager, great guy, built this like sort of structure, I don't know, out of things that were in the hotel. And he was talking about how when you are approaching businesses that don't want to change, as you say, or like monoliths or whatever, that we're adding these little pebbles to one side of the scale not calling it like enormous transformation. We're calling it workforce development. We're calling it good business to have people on the ground looking out for food safety. We're calling it all these things and these pebbles, but we're also at the same time creating a weight for hopefully for a systemic change about how the industrial agricultural world works. You know, but I'm not having to do most of that heavy lifting. I'm on the farm, I'm on the ground. The people making the really hard conversations and those initial relationships is the organization. Anyway, that is the Equitable Food Initiative. That's the project I work on with them. I'm doing a training next week for a farm in California that harvests berries. So we'll see how that goes. Because I don't have to fly to the farms, I was generally sent into Mexico. Now I've been going to farms in Canada and the United States also, which has been really interesting, really challenging. So many different layers of languages being spoken on the farm. So we're having to live interpret as we go. We're having to figure out how this thing we did before, where it involved being together in the same room, how do we do it in small spaces with people unaccustomed to being in an office looking at a screen all day long. So I do a lot of jumping up and down around my computer for the Equitable Food Initiative. Okay, so the second project, and I want to be conscious of time, is, let me share my screen. Oh dear, how did I get all the way up here? Is a hybrid organization. It's based in Oaxaca. It has a nonprofit arm that's called Innovando la Tradición, which means innovating tradition. And that nonprofit arm works or is looking to work to strengthen and develop the pottery trade and profession. And the pottery trade and profession as a way of life. And they're looking to do it over the long haul. Like it's not a short-term thing. There's something they're looking to build, change over the long haul. They work with sustainable design. They work with what I would consider as a relationship model. So at the center of their model of the nonprofit is the relationship happening all along the chain of what they do. So the potter, who most potters harvest and mine clay, not from a store where they go and buy like a kilo of it. They're going to the mountain and they're digging out the clay and processing it. So the relationship of this potter with the environment, with the earth, with their community and their family, then the relationship between that potter and this organization. Oh, I can hear my dog really wants to go out, but you're gonna have to wait. And the relationship between the store that sells that product with the customer, knowing whose hands touched it, who was working on it, where did this come from, how long does it take. So their model is important about all along the way. They care about the people who are all a part of this chain. And then the other branch of the organization is called 1050 degrees, which is the temperature at which clay is burned in a kiln. And what they do is commercialize the products that they're making. So they're a fair trade social enterprise. They're cooperative. So the potters are equal partners and co-owners in the business, and members of the cooperative receive social benefits like healthcare. They commercialize pieces that come from different potters in different communities. They and part of the profits that they make at Colectivo 1050 is used to fund the nonprofit organization. And their kind of end goal is working to elevate not just selling products, but the symbolic and cultural and commercial value of pottery in the world. So they do exhibitions, they do in museums, they do talks, because they're trying to raise the symbolic and cultural and commercial value of pottery. So sorry, I should have shown you some pictures while I was talking. So this is some of the work. I work for the nonprofit organization, Innovating Tradition. And And very specifically, the project I work on with them is called the Potter's Knowledge Community. And I should say it at first is that pottery in Mexico is a way of life. You're not just a ceramic artist. You're not just making pieces. It is a way of life and a culture, a rural life. Most often in indigenous communities, it's tied very closely with an agrarian lifestyle and all the things that come with that way of life. The potters will talk to you about not just making pieces, but even what they're drawing on to make pieces, not inspiration, but the faith they have in what they're doing. So what the knowledge community is, the second thing I want to mention is potters learn from copying their family members. So a grandmother teaches her daughter, who then teaches her son, who teaches his nephew, right? So it's passed down like that, copying what someone makes, trying to perfect that, and then starting to make your own pieces and selling them. People do not share between families. Neighbors do not share practices with other neighbors, even in the same pottery making community. And potters between communities never share. So the project I work on with them is called the Potter's Knowledge Community, or the Comunidad Alfarera de Aprendizaje. And we bring together potters from different communities that come together. It emerged from them working with this organization on the commercial side for years. They were interested in what each other was doing. And we brought them together to form this knowledge community, to share best practices in their trade, develop and explore new ways to do things. But the idea of coming together across communities is revolutionary. Not from us, from them. Sharing in this way is wholly unique, They also come together and share not just things about how they make pottery and making new pieces and accessing markets or accessing new markets, but they're also coming together to share and reflect and explore their roles as potters in the world, like their relationship with their market, with the local market, with the global market, with the environment, with their own health and what their practice does to their health, how their health affects their trade, their roles as leaders in their communities and their families in the world. So what we're doing is that this organization hired me 4 years ago to help them build out this program that had been emerging from the potters themselves over the course of the year. I want to meet him. I'm interested in what he's doing. I wish I could talk to someone about. And so they hired me to come and help them on a team to develop this community and this learning program, a learning program made, or the model for learning made by its own participants. How do we learn as potters? What do we want to learn about? So we get together once a month. It's we convene in Oaxaca or at someone's workshop. They come together. We'll generally in a year focus on something in particular, like this year, this is an example of exchange they do where they're showing their learning. This is a forum that they hosted, that the community hosted to teach each other, potters from different communities, how they make things. So some of the stuff we're doing was we meet once a month is like this last year, our focus was in 3 branches. One branch was we wanted them to create, they were interested in making new pieces, and we suggest the idea of creating pieces for pulque, which is a Mesoamerican drink. It's fermented from the maguey plant. It's slightly alcoholic. It's delicious and refreshing. It's cold. And so they developed over time. They started working with textures and experimenting with textures and different objects and things they could do with textures, making them on little plaques. And then they started applying them to pieces and playing with different forms for pieces, jars, cups, something called a jicara, which is like a bowl. And then the second branch we worked on was the last year we were learning a format for costing our pieces, like how we come up with the price. And so we, this year, we asked them to start thinking about how would they teach someone else to do that, someone else in their community and their family, another potter. And we started developing a manual about how to cost a piece, but made for potters by potters. So in their language, and I'm not talking about Spanish or Zapotec, but their language of how they speak and do things, visual language, what's important to share. The manual includes things like advice, like be patient. This part always gives me a headache, but you can do it. Or make sure you do this with your daughter because she knows how to use her cell phone to clock the time that it took you to make this part. You know, like all these sort of things that came out of them. We started thinking about how would we teach someone else this? How would we do it? So we've been developing a manual with them. And then the third branch that we worked on this last year was we're always having conversations and dialogues, and we do them consecutively, building on top of each other. So conversations about what is our preferred story about our place in the world. This is my sort of larger title for it. You know, like there's a dominant story or narrative that the world tells us about ourselves as potters. Like, you are poor, you are uneducated, you are left behind in an old practice that no longer is necessary, is one story. Or a preferred story like, I am rich in land, I am rich in skills, I am rich in connections in my community, to the earth, to my craft and what I do. I have a PhD in what I do, a millennial practice that was passed down to me that I've been working on for decades. So like the difference in these stories and what they inspire us to do, or what they can move us to take action to do, is another thing that we often work on, like over the course of months, about asking questions and building a new preferred story or narrative. This is something called narrative practice, which they use a lot in different therapeutic practices, but you can use it with groups as well. So this is like just some pictures of them working together. These ladies are from 2 different villages. We put out a bunch of different kind of cups, and they were testing the cups for, like, we were talking about ergonomics. Like when they think about making something, think about how it feels to hold it in your hand, like how it holds hot or cold liquid, how it feels to hold it to your mouth. And so they're experimenting and practicing. We're in conversation a lot. These lovely ladies are from a community called San Marcos Tlapasola. They each had to pick a word that was they're gonna develop a piece based on this adjective. And I love that the woman, Macrina, who has the Post-it on her head, it says elegant. And I just think it's very fitting picture. And what I want to share, what I think is interesting about this, we do a lot of learning by doing. So this is us. Most potters don't make their own kiln. They're usually kiln builders who go around to communities to build a kiln. And often what happens is they build the kiln, they go away, and something is wrong with it, and the potter has no idea how to fix it. So they go, figuring out, like plugging a hole here, putting something over here, trying to make it work, but it's never quite right. And so we talked to a master kiln builder who is self-taught and has been now, working at building kilns for centuries, decades. And we said, let's learn how to build a kiln. And so we built one. And we built one for one of the families, and we did it all together. And it was an incredible process of seeing what we can do, what we can accomplish, what we can learn by putting it in our hands and making it. And this is it at the end. It's a energy saving kiln. The design of it, the hood and the round shape of it and the proportions they're inside means it burns 1/3 of the wood that normally the potter is in front in pink. Her name's Francisca, and her husband, who is a construction worker, is next to her. And since this time that we built the kiln a couple of years ago, we've been working that both Francisca and her husband can start becoming kiln makers. And so they've been going to help build kilns and practice with that same kiln builder to learn the craft of making kilns as well. And they call this their kiln the jaguar. is its name. And so we had a ceremony, we put some flowers, burned some copal incense, and inaugurated their kiln. We do a lot of stuff also, like again, like play with image, theater. We ask them to talk to us about the process that you make pieces with. It's extremely labor intensive. They go to the first picture I showed you guys. I went with these ladies from San Marcos Tapazola to go mine their red clay. What they're carrying, each of them has a scarf around them, and they're carrying like a big sack of the clay that they look, it's not in one place. They go to a mine and, oh, there it is, it's a treasure trove. They have to look around and look for the right consistency and color that they're looking for and put it in these sacks. And you notice the only person who does not have a scarf is me, because they were like, you're too weak. You're not going to be able to carry this down the mountain, Megan. Your arms are too skinny, you know? But the process, we had them one time map out in clay all the things they do to get a piece from the beginning to the end. You know, some communities, they mine the clay, they process it, meaning they mix it with water, they sieve it, they pull out the impurities, then they're massaging it, or sometimes they beat it. Some communities, they have to beat it with a huge, like a tree branch sort of thing, to get it to the consistency. That's all before they're making the piece. Other communities, some use molds, some use like a what do you call it, in English, a turntable? No, you know, like a wheel, like a ceramic wheel, but most are making everything by hand. Most are making almost everything they do by hand. And some of them have cook in a kiln that reduces oxygen. They cut off the amount of oxygen that feeds the fire, and that burns or lays in a stain of black. The smoke stains the piece black and it stays black forever. Or others make a tincture from oak tree bark, and when the kiln is hot and the piece has finished cooking, they pull it out while the fire is still super hot with tongs, and they splatter paint it Pollock style with this tincture that stays and sets into the heat of the piece. Anyway, it's so variable, each community, what they do. And this is like a forum that some of the members of the community led, of potters from all over the country who came. And normally it's like a PowerPoint presentation, somebody from a university talking. And so we organized one with the potters from our community, and they led it and held conversations. The future of this, some of the projects we're doing with the potters community, is we're dreaming about with the potters right now. This is their dream. And I'm like, oh God, how are we gonna make this happen? Is a university, a Potters University. And we don't just teach how to make pottery at the Potters University, but we teach about the way of life. And one of the things that like really pulled me in when this organization invited me to work with them is, instead of, most often in the nonprofit world, you hear people saying like, we need to save these people. We need to rescue this practice. We need to conserve this thing that's about to disappear forever. And the way they talk about it at Innovando la Tradición is they say, it's not about what the world can do to help save potters or pottery, but how does the way potters live and work in the world serve the future of Mexico and the world? Because their way of life and what they value, their ways of learning, have something to offer our future. And that twist is so significant and important to me, and just like sucked me in. Anyway, that's the end of my formal part of the presentation. Those are the two projects I want to share. I don't know if you guys, if I missed some questions or you want to comment or question about something, have at it.
Well, that was so interesting, says your friend Aubrey. It was good. So smart. You are so smart, Megan. All those details straight of everything. It's amazing. So have you thought about connecting the potters with people who do pottery in the United States, like the pottery communities? Have you done any of that?
Not me personally, but the organization has for for many years. They're about 15 years old, and they started by doing kind of one-off, like let's say a week-long or a 2-week-long classes with designers, ceramicists from the United States, working with some of the potters from these communities. They have a very beautiful network of donors who come from all sides. Some of them are ceramic artists themselves. So they do a lot about collaboration and sharing. They consider themselves, the organization, like a bridge is one of their central functions of connecting people. So yeah, they do. Yeah.
Any other questions?
Megan, this is CJ. I'm wondering, you've been there a long time, you're very established in the community. Does being a gringa cause problems at all? Or still, even when people know you, or if they don't know you, is it a problem in being able to achieve your work?
I mean, I'm sensitive to it, meaning I'm sensitive, I'm walking into somewhere as a white woman from outside this country, that even though I've lived here for 14 years, I'm an insider and outsider at the same time. So I have a particular sensitivity to my imposition in any way it can manifest itself. So mostly, and unfortunately, because I come from outside and I'm white, lots of times in communities, people are like, oh, she has the answer, or the money, or the thing, and I get treated with some respect and expertise that I might not even own. It's in my advantage. It's not in my advantage over the long term, when I'm interested in breaking the paradigm of I've come in with an answer for you. There's a language barrier oftentimes, and not just like English and Spanish, but like in indigenous languages or cultural codes that I can miss and not pick up on. And I would say with collaborators I work with, I sometimes have to say, let me work out the hiccups of non-understanding between me and the participants on my own. Don't translate me or interpret me, or because we're going to have to work through not understanding each other. And someone feels comfortable saying, I don't get what you're saying, or I don't understand what you're saying. I feel like these are all very legitimate, valuable trade-offs for the privilege of getting to work with all these wonderful people and outside my country as a visitor. But I do, in Mexican culture, I'm a lot less direct than I used to be when I was just living in the United States, because it got me into a lot of trouble. So that's another piece. I'm particularly sensitive to it though, so I don't know.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
There's another question from Aubrey. Are there any dream projects?
Oh, Aubrey, quit making me think into the future. I mean, so the manual that we're working on about how to cost a piece is so complex to me, thinking about the pedagogy of how you break something. We lived a process with the potters, and now we're trying to put it into a document. And it's so rich and complicated and complex. And I'm like imagining a library filled with books made by the potters about what they do. That's a dream. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I would love an archive filled with their knowledge. In books, like Japanese culture has a really strong ceramic pottery trade and profession, so venerated in the country. There are history books filled with details about their kilns. There is not a single book about the kilns in Mexico. Not a single one. There's a giant hole in the history. They'll have mentions of it in anthropological books or history books, but nothing, like exhaustive. It just feels like just a giant hole there that I feel like the communities and the potters themselves should fill in their own way,
Any other questions? Are they as advanced in technology and its use as is in the States? I think it's
Mhm. I get you, Dave. I mean, no, because there's limited access to the internet, to electricity, to cell phone signal. There's definitely like now, this wasn't true 14 years ago when I was out like recording radio pieces that people would have cell phones everywhere. Now it is ubiquitous, like, you know, 67-year-old Potter out in this community has a cell phone. She doesn't know how to use it, but she does have one. But yeah, there's a lot less checking email and, you know, looking at a computer. And that was created a huge challenge in 2020 for us. We couldn't be together. We couldn't come together with the Potters physically. And what happened, and I think it was quite lovely and beautiful, is we turned to their nieces and nephews and grandkids and we're like, help us connect your aunt, your uncle, your grandmother, we need to connect using Zoom and see if we can make this happen. First, we asked the grandmothers and the tias and we said, would you be interested? Do you want it? And they wanted to be together again in some way. And so the very beginning of 2020 was like, my cohorts driving to a gas station in the Mixteca region of the mountains, where some people could come down from their mountain village and there was a signal there, but there was no internet except for a restaurant there, but it wouldn't let them go inside. So they sat outside in the parking lot with a tablet while 7 of them are around the computer. And I'm like here and I'm calling into somebody in Chiapas and their nephew is trying to help them. But it became like a real family effort to like keep us together, and people would make things and show it. And we had this guy from a pulque museum show us all these pieces, and we were just like, what can we do and make happen? And then all of a sudden it turned out, as we could start to be together in small clusters and masked, that those nieces and nephews and grandchildren were like, I'm curious, because I had to help get my aunt connected. Like, what is this you're doing? Which is like a real boon for us, that the next generation is like, coming on of their own accord and saying, this is curious and this is exciting and I want to be a part of this. So.
Nice.
There's another question in there. Do you see it, Megan?
Yeah, so in case of your archive dream, you would make available in book form and maybe digital, make sure all can access it. Goal being so all who want and need information would have access. Yeah, the one we're making now, I mean, I don't know. This is in the future. The one we're making now has a mix of drawings, text. It has some like QR codes you can zap with your phone and watch a quick video from a Potter showing you something quick or giving you advice like, come on, friend, keep at it. This is a very tedious process, but you can do it, So it has a little bit of a mix. And I mean, we're still trying to figure it out as we go. Does this work? I mean, one of the things I feel I learn a ton from what I'm doing because I'm walking into a situation as a non-expert, right? But I also have to unlearn a lot too. I have to unlearn, like, when you're working in a rural multilingual community that doesn't rely on the written word, I have to unlearn things like, if we don't document this and write this down, it didn't exist and people won't remember it. Like, I have to question my own self, and my own education told me certain things, and popular education, they say like, no education is free of politics or class. And so when we don't mention politics or class, it's not neutral, we're taking a position. And so I'm having to unlearn things too about what I grew up learning and how you should learn, how you remember and how you share. And I'm still trying to figure that out. I'm in the middle. We haven't finished the manual. It's like in process. Aubrey, you'll get to see it because she's in Oaxaca. We're having an exhibition this Saturday, and we're gonna have all our process of how we made the manual. But I'm still in there thinking like, is this the way to do it? But that's just the constant conversation.
Well, are there any other questions?
Just a comment, Megan, this has been terrific, and thank you very much for the most interesting and exciting program.
Oh, thank you, Tom. Thank you for the invitation.
A lot of learning to be done on what you're doing and how you're doing it and the process of your doing it. My mind is happy and full. So thank you so much. All right. Do you want to have a reminder about next time, Tom?
Nah.
Just one more?
Karen says, no, it's okay.
No, it's okay. Okay, but Peter
2
said
weeks from tonight, but Megan's mom is in charge of the program. So the Fiat folks and Peter Lindsay Hammond from Restore Justice, 2 weeks from tonight. Hope you can join us.
and you can look for the sign up information in our e-blast or emails, or you can contact me directly. My email's on the website. So thank you so much. I think we're going to say good night and enjoy the rest of your evening, everyone.
Adios.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you, my family, for showing up.